When you talk about the team that ultimately loses in the Super Bowl every year, it's kind of one of those things. I think it's in the eye of the beholder. You look at the fact that it's a team that won their conference and made it to the Super Bowl. They had to have some type of really good season. It's got to be a positive thing. And on the flip side of that argument is the fact that, well, at the end of the day, it's all semantics. At the end of the NFL season, there's one Super Bowl champion and 31 losers. Plain and simple. You either win the championship or you don't. And out of 32 teams in the league every year, only one of them can be the ones that ultimately hoist Lombardi Trophy at the end of the Super Bowl every year. So if you go based off of the measurement of that and that alone for success and how you should feel about a season, then every year, no matter what, no team that fails to win the Super Bowl should be viewed as having had a good or successful season. It's a harsh reality in a bit of a way. And I think there's some truth to that. I think there's also some truth to the fact of, and I don't think it's necessarily a loser mentality to say, hey, at least they got there, because you had to have a lot of things go right for you along the way. You had to make a lot of your own breaks. You had to do something really, really good and really, really special to win your conference's championship and even make it to the Super Bowl to begin with. So when we're talking about the 2015 Carolina Panthers, I think it's kind of a mixed bag. Because, I mean, you're talking about a team that had so many things go right for them throughout 2015. I was pretty high on this team heading into this season, and I had a wide variety of reasons why I felt that. I didn't think their division was all that particularly strong, and it most certainly was not. I thought we would see another year of growth and development in Cam Newton, especially during the regular season, and most certainly did we get that. I thought this was a team that would surprise some people in terms of their ability to score points, and a team that would have a good, solid defensive unit. And you had all of that and so much more. You're talking about a Carolina Panthers team that at one point in time, it was a legitimate thought that this team could end up running the table and going undefeated and end up winning the Super Bowl and being one of those great all-time teams. And you're still talking about a team that went 15-1 in the regular season. 15-1. Again, I will emphasize, 15-1. There are a lot of teams that have never went 15-1. And yet, here is one of the few teams that has ever went 15-1 in a regular season that failed to win a Super Bowl championship. I think about teams going back to the 2004 Pittsburgh Steelers and the 2011 Green Bay Packers as two recent examples of 15-1 teams that failed to win the Super Bowl. But again, it doesn't happen a lot. It just doesn't. And again, like I said, you think about it and you're like, my goodness. These teams had incredible years. Like the Packers in 2011, were the defending Super Bowl champions, and they were just on fire throughout the regular season. But then they get to the divisional round of the playoffs at home against the Giants, and they're out. So, 15-1 is great, but 15-1 don't mean a thing without a ring. And for the Carolina Panthers, is that kind of what it's like? It's 15-1 is great, and making it to the Super Bowl is great. But 15-1 don't mean a thing without a ring. I mean, and it's a shame because so many things went well for them. Cam Newton was the NFL's MVP beyond question. I mean, he carried this team on his back in a lot of ways. Certainly offensively, he was, you could argue, the best player in the National Football League in 2015, and most certainly based off the circumstances, situation, and performance of the Carolina Panthers, he was the league's most valuable player. You've got the Coach of the Year and Ron Rivera. You would argue the Executive of the Year and General Manager Dave Gettleman. Jonathan Stewart stayed healthy for the majority of the season, which is a rarefied thing for him to do. The defense played at a top flight level, Josh Norman established himself as arguably an elite corner in the National Football League. Luke Kuechly continued to be a dominant middle linebacker. Thomas Davis had another outstanding year. Kawan Short became a Pro Bowl, borderline all-pro type of talent inside a defensive tackle. And again, they went 15-1, and then you get to the playoffs. Playoffs? In the divisional round. They're spanking the Seahawks in the first round, in the divisional round, in the first half. The two-time defending NFC champions, the Super Bowl 48 champions, the team that came this close to being back-to-back Super Bowl champions, beating the Patriots in Super Bowl 49. And here are the Panthers just steamrolling their ass in the first half. And yeah, it became a game late, but they still dominated and imposed their will. And then you get to the NFC Championship game. And for me, they're facing off against the one team, the Arizona Cardinals, that I thought posed the single biggest threat to them and was the single biggest challenge to them. And they destroyed them. They made Carson Palmer look like an ham and egger when he himself was having an MVP caliber season. They shredded that Arizona Cardinals quality defense. You're sitting there and you're like, man, 15-1, spanked the Seahawks kind of good, smashed and destroyed the Arizona Cardinals, and bent them over, baby. Fucked them in the ass, made them humbles. And then you get to Super Bowl 50, and there's all these expectations. You've got the MVP, this dominant performance in the playoffs. You look at the Denver Broncos on the flip side, and you're like, man, they struggled to even make it out of the playoffs in the AFC. And now you're coming to the Super Bowl with this Carolina Panthers team, 15-1, MVP at the quarterback position, all of this momentum, dominant playoff performances in the divisional and championship game rounds. And you're like, there's no way this Panthers team could lose. And I'll admit it. I thought the Panthers were going to win by probably 2 touchdowns. Because I just didn't see where it added up. I just didn't see where this team could not win that game. But ultimately, that's why they play the game. And when we could talk about things that didn't go well in this season, you can talk about Kelvin Benjamin going down in the preseason with the ACL injury. That most certainly didn't help. But when you look at it, the team still found a way to go 15-1. Cam Newton still had an MVP season. So, they adjusted to life without Kelvin Benjamin, and they made it work. But you get to the Super Bowl. I mean, again, a 15-1 team that fails to win the Super Bowl, it just doesn't happen every day. And what's astounding about this is the fact that they allowed a truly one-dimensional team in the Denver Broncos to beat them in the Super Bowl. Just unbelievable. As that Broncos offense stunk, and Peyton Manning was fucking terrible. He was bad throughout the playoffs, and he was really bad in particular during the Super Bowl. And for those people that want to sit there and be the ultimate apologist and say Peyton Manning was some type of game manager in the playoffs and a game manager in the Super Bowl, what the hell were you talking about? Game managers put their teams in advantageous positions, at least, if nothing else, and they take good care of the football. Peyton Manning didn't even do that in the Super Bowl. So how are you going to tell me that this guy was even a game manager? And yet here are the Carolina Panthers. They get to this moment. They've got all this positive press behind them. Everybody thinking they're going to go out there and smash the Denver Broncos. And they laid a fucking egg. They absolutely laid a fucking egg. That defense, to be fair, played very well. And for all the talk about the Denver Broncos defense, and all of it deserved and justified, especially based off of that performance in the Super Bowl, the Carolina Panthers defense played more than well enough. They played at a very, very high level throughout most of that game, and they definitely played at a high enough level to help this team win a Super Bowl. The failures all came on the offensive side of the ball, where you've got the MVP of the league, Cam Newton. And I think it goes beyond Cam Newton. What I don't understand about the offensive play calling philosophy and the offensive philosophy in general of the Panthers in Super Bowl 50 is the fact that you sit there and know that there's only one way the Denver Broncos are going to beat you. Because frankly, let's be honest, their secondary has some names people know about, but that secondary could be shredded. See Antonio Brown, see others. You knew the only way you were going to lose is if Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware imposed their will on that game. How in the hell do you allow that to happen? This is kind of like that Belichick philosophy for so many years, where you sit there and you say, hey, you know what? This is what they do best. We are going to gear ourselves towards stopping that and that alone. And then if they beat us another way, so effing be it. Or if I don't shoot myself in the damn foot first because I make a ridiculously stupid game management decision. Well, here you are. It's the Super Bowl. You know there's only one way the Carolina Panthers are going to lose. There's only one way the Denver Broncos are going to win. You can't let Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware go off. And what was incredibly stunning to me was the lack of adjustment on the offensive side of the ball and their play calling, in particular in the second half, where you know Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware are causing havoc. You know you can't block these guys on the edge one-on-one. And the only help they would offer occasionally would be a running back like Mike Tolbert in the pass protection scheme, what the hell is going on here? If you got to put in a 6th offensive lineman, that's what you do. If you got to put in 7 offensive linemen, seriously, that's what the hell you do. You cannot allow Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware to beat you when you know that is the only way that you lose that game. And that's exactly what the hell the Carolina Panthers did. And what was even more astounding to me is how they structured their offensive game plan and plan of attack, especially early. Cam Newton is a tremendous athlete. Cam Newton has the great ability to pick up big yardage with his feet. One way to stop an aggressive edge rush is by a quarterback that can scramble, that can take off with the ball and run it up the middle where the defense isn't. And they just didn't structure the defense enough to try and put the halt on Miller and Ware on the outside and try to do enough to get Cam comfortable, to get Cam in rhythm early, to get Cam on the move, to generate some yards on the ground with him, to get him in that flow, get some momentum on Carolina's side early. It's like all of a sudden they want to make Cam a purely pocket passer when the philosophy should not have called for that, and the game in the moment did not need that. It was a terrible decision, and I will never for the life of me understand it. And I don't say this just to take away credit from the Denver Broncos, because at the end of the day, all other BS aside, they won the Super Bowl. They won it. They were the better team that day. That is all that matters. They did a better job of doing what they needed to do than the Carolina Panthers did in what they needed to do. I just cannot believe that this team that had been coached so well all year long had been so thoroughly outcoached in the biggest and brightest of moments. And it almost speaks to the fact that maybe the entire organization was a little in over their heads, and in particular, the moment was just too big and the spotlight was too bright for them. And when you look at Cam Newton, as I was watching Super Bowl 50 early on, I'm like, this is the dude. This is that next elite quarterback in the NFL. He's going to be one of the standard bearers of the league for the next decade. The MVP, he's going to be the guy. This is his moment. This is his chance to crown his ass, to sit there and stamp his place and really begin his legacy and take the NFL into the next generation. But yet when he gets to this moment, it's like his king-sized grapefruits got shriveled up. And that's the truth. I looked at him early. I'm like, man, something doesn't even seem right about him. He seems too nervous. He seems too anxious. And I think part of the flaw with the offensive game plan was, again, that it failed to get Cam Newton comfortable and in the rhythm early on, because the Super Bowl is the Super Bowl. You can forget all that other bullshit. At the end of the day, the Super Bowl is still the biggest game in town. You know, that's where everything is on the line. That is the season, ultimately. And it seemed like he was playing scared. He was intimidated by the moment. You know, Miller hit him early. And he just never really seemed like Cam Newton truly got in a great rhythm. Now, sure, we could talk about some of the drops. We can talk about fumbles, turning the ball over. Those are all factors too. But at the end of the day, the franchise quarterback is the guy that is the leader. He is the straw that stirs the drink, and he's the guy that the team will ultimately follow. Win or lose, title be damned or not. And it was just striking to me. Because you could sit there and say for the Carolina Panthers, Cam Newton's only, 26 years of age or so? His best years are in theory ahead of him. You got a team with a lot of young players and a lot of young stars on both sides of the ball. You look at this team and you say, this is a team that should be able to contend for several years to come. And in theory, they could be. And on paper, they could be. But man, you just never know. And that's a shameful thing about it for the Carolina Panthers, is they were ultimately so close, yet they were so far away. And what they really did was ultimately take a golden opportunity and let it go by the wayside. They frankly pissed it down their legs, if I'm being so blunt and so honest. And look, I have a lot of respect for that Carolina Panthers organization. I'm a big fan of Ron Rivera. As you know, I'm a big fan of Cam Newton. But, late in the fourth quarter, when this game is on the line, it's a one-touchdown game. You score a touchdown, you win, and you fumble the ball, and you don't die for it? It's one thing to lose in the Super Bowl. It's another thing to lose and have the perception that you didn't even go down swinging. You didn't even go down trying. That's something that I fear could haunt this Carolina Panthers organization, and in particular Cam Newton, for many years to come. And it's a shame, and it's a tragedy in a bit of a way, but it is what it is. So now you look at the Carolina Panthers heading into this offseason. How do they rebound from this? how do they avoid a Super Bowl hangover? They'll have some decisions to make. I'm assuming they'll end up getting Josh Norman re-signed to a long-term deal at some point in time. Obviously, getting Kelvin Benjamin back from the ACL injury is going to help. But this is a team that, needs to figure out how to compartmentalize what happened in this season and be able to move forward and figure out and learn. Sometimes to be a champion, you got to learn from your losses before you learn and figure out how to win. It's that simple. I saw this with the Bulls in the late 80s and early 90s. It took Jordan and the Bulls years to figure out how to beat the Detroit Pistons in the playoffs. But when they did, oh, baby, it ended the bad boys once and for all. But it took time. They had to learn lessons along the way, and they had to figure it out. And they had to learn how to lose and learn from their losses before they ultimately overcame that obstacle and reached the mountaintop. And maybe that's what it could be for Carolina. But, history isn't kind to Carolina. Tell me the last time a team lost the Super Bowl one year and made it back the next. I'll wait. It's been a long, long time. It really, truly has. So you think about it, there's nothing guaranteed at all. This team needs to get better on the offensive side of the ball in terms of they need to get better with their pass protection. The Super Bowl most certainly exposed that. I think they could use a better young complement at running back to Jonathan Stewart. They could maybe use a second tight end to complement Greg Olsen, especially in situations like this game here, where if you're able to deploy two tight ends, you might get Miller and Ware to have some pause, and you might slow them down a little bit because they have to worry about these two guys. The Broncos didn't have to do that in the Super Bowl. And it's just, you look at the defensive side of the ball, they could use some young depth on the outside at defensive end. They could probably use some depth at the corner position as well. They're still a really good team, like I said, with young stars on both sides of the ball that should be building blocks of a potential championship contending team for years to come. But it will be really important for this team in this offseason to address some of its deficiencies and to, most importantly of all, move on from what happened last year, but to learn from what happened last year in this past season and grow from it and become better and try to go once again after winning a championship. And again, like I said, history is not kind to the Super Bowl losers. It's been over 2 decades. I think the last team that made it back to the Super Bowl after losing the year before were the Bills of the 90s, if memory serves me correctly. It's been a long, long time. There are many reasons for that. For the Panthers' sake, the good thing is they shouldn't get torn apart too much by free agency, by a bunch of guys departing, like teams that make the Super Bowl usually have happen to them. So that'll help them. They've got a franchise quarterback in the mix. That most certainly is going to help them. But, with the crap about the press conference and not diving for the football and in general just laying a fucking turd on the biggest stage of their all, I'll be really curious to see what Cam's got up next for 2016. Because nothing is guaranteed and nothing is promised. This is a team that should contend. This is a team that, in theory, should be the favorites to win Super Bowl 51. But just because it's a theory doesn't make it 100% true. And in this particular case, it may very well not be 100% true. A really, really good season that has to be as disappointing as any because you come up this short when you shouldn't have. And there was just no reason for it to happen. So congratulations to the Carolina Panthers still for a really, really good season. 15-1, NFC champions. Something to build on for the future.